start by saying thanks, because people ask great questions, and 180 questions over 3 services. What did I get to 30 of them in the service? There's 150 other questions that I didn't get to, and I won't even get to today, right? But I'm like, I respect the process of asking questions, wanting to learn. Only a few of the questions were really judgy in their tone, and most of them were curious. So I chose the curious ones here. So can I make a few observations about these questions? I think they fall into some categories. I wrote these down. So I thought sometimes people were asking, why did God fill in the blank? Why did he do this? Or why didn't he do this? And I just want all of us to appreciate, sometimes I can answer those questions, or someone who knows the scriptures can. But anytime you hear yourself say, why did God? Like, let's just appreciate we're all starting at a deficit to think that my mind is going to understand God's mind. So I think the right move is humility, right? And to say, I'm not totally sure. It's okay to say, I don't know. Some of the questions were about interpreting the Bible. I love that. I'm like, hey, I think that's a tough thing today. People are trying to figure out the Bible, and then they just Google it, and then whatever, and it's like,
Google's giving you like 19
I know.
And all of them conflict somehow.
And in terms of things I might teach about next year, I think hey, let's go over some of the at least 4 core principles of interpreting the Bible. Something basic that can answer 70% of our questions, if not 100%. So I think that's big. People ask, why does Suncrest do or not do certain things? And I think most of it's curiosity. The judgy tone was in some of those. Why doesn't Suncrest do this? I'm like, well, talk to me in the comments. Maybe I'll answer you. So,
why doesn't Suncrest bring back the lemonade?
and the small plastic cups.
Small plastic cups.
I know. What did we get, bougie all of a sudden?
No,
so
change happens here.
Yeah. But my favorite category of question is the how do I question, because I think it's a very Suncrest question in some ways. Like, people are wanting to understand the scriptures and God, wanting to do the right thing and trying to figure out how that fits into life. And I'm like, ask that question as often as you can. Ask it of yourself, ask it of the scriptures, ask it of me. I want to help you really live this out in life. So that's good.
What are the ways that, so you're saying you want to help people live that out?
I do.
Base level, if you're shooting from the hip right now, what's the fastest way for you to point someone in the right direction?
Into a group or a team. And here's why I say that. I mean, obviously that's a structure for us at Suncrest, but this format, everybody asking Greg their questions, is helpful in a very limited way, right? But if you had someone in your life who would dialogue with you and is competent to understand the scriptures a little bit, understand your situation, almost all of these questions, I'm like, oh, I need 3 more details. I need to ask the second and the third question. And we don't get to do that here. But if you have a leader in your life, which is our whole structure for groups and teams, that's how you would do that.
I know that the times that I've been a part of a group or a team, it definitely changes my whole ability to not just wrestle with my questions, but to feel like God is wrestling with them.
Yes. Love that.
So I've got some quick fire questions.
Perfect. Let's do them.
All right. So this phrase was texted in quite a bit. So unequally yoked. So what's going on there? Describe that question. Describe what you know about that phrase.
Yeah, most Christians use that in terms of marriage, right? And the whole idea is a Christian shouldn't marry a person who isn't a Christian, which is a fair application of the passage and also not the totality of the passage. The whole idea is there are certain things where if you're going to intertwine your lives together, so marriage, I would say if you're being business partners, anywhere where like it would be tough to pull you apart, like the idea is you should share values, you should share faith. You don't want to entangle your life with someone who doesn't share your current values or where you want to go. So I just think as a concept, it's really smart for all of us to say, don't get unequally yoked. The image of yoked is 2 oxen yoked together, and you have to be pulling in the same direction. And when you do, it pays off. What is it? You can pull 10 times as much weight with 2 times the number of ox. But yes. So, but you don't want to be pulling the opposite direction of someone in one of your key relationships of life.
That's so good. why is it that we say Jesus is God when he prayed to God in the garden?
Yeah, this is a great example of a question that has a technical answer to it that I think can be helpful. So you might get hung up, but Jesus is God, and he actually prayed in the garden to the Father, who is also God, right? So it's not in some sense saying Jesus can't be God. What was he doing talking to himself? It's an appreciation of the Trinity that the Son is praying to the Father, and we too, pray to the Father in the name of the Son, and that is God. Now, if you ask me to explain the Trinity, we're going to need a longer session.
I thought you were really going to try to tackle the mysteries of Christianity in about 90 seconds.
Yeah.
I'm a little upset. It's fine, we'll move on. Is it wrong that I like animals more than people? I did not submit this question. I'm reading it as it was sent.
It's a great question. Do you know how many people I know who love animals more than people? Is it wrong? Oh, well, this is a category. People love to say, is it wrong? Is it sinful? I'm like, well, it's not the way Jesus lived his life, and we're aiming to live our lives as Jesus. Jesus valued people more than animals, and so I'd encourage you to move in that direction, but I'm not trying to slap somebody on the hand and say, oh, that's a sin. So,
what if I've got a really cool goldfish?
Really cool goldfish.
Goldfish more than people?
You can, only the cool ones, they have to have stripes in the shape of a cross. Then, yeah.
Is it okay for to ask for signs, or is that testing God? So what does that mean, and also what does that mean?
Yeah, so is it okay to ask for signs, or is it, if I ask God for a sign, am I testing him in some way? And I'm like, oh, we love to create these technical dichotomies, right? And I'm just saying, you got to be careful about testing God. The scriptures warn against that. But asking for a sign, I don't know. I'm desperate many times to say, God, what are you leading me to? And I'm not forcing him. I'm not saying, I'm not doing it unless you give me a sign. That would be testing God. But to say, God, show me. I need to know. I'm not putting you on the hook for what the sign is, but I do want your revelation in my life. So it's perfectly okay in that spirit to ask God to show you for a sign.
If we need to accept Jesus as Savior, what about those who lived before Jesus?
Yep. So the people who lived before Jesus had to trust that Jesus was going to be the Savior, and the people who have lived after Jesus, we have to trust that he was. So it's actually all the same thing. It's all about placing our trust on the idea that there was one who came or was coming to save us.
Do the relationships on earth matter in heaven?
The relationships on earth do matter in heaven. The picture of a reunion in heaven is a real picture that the scriptures give us. I will say this, there is no marriage in heaven.
So soulmates.
Soulmates. Earthly soulmates?
I don't know. So are we basically just saying there's none?
So, there's a technical thought to this question. So, okay, how many people do you know who were married, and then their spouse died, and then they got remarried again, and they're all going to be in heaven? That'd be weird if there was marriage in heaven.
It'd be at least
right?
A little uncomfortable.
It's a little uncomfortable. And yet, in the beauty of what heaven is, relationships will matter, but no marriage.
What's the best way to pray?
See, this is a great question. And when I heard it, I thought, oh, I got big categories for you, right? So on one hand, I'd say the best way to pray in a technical way is out loud and on your knees. I'm not sure if that's what the person's asking, but if you're just looking for a really practical way to pray well, for me, out loud and on my knees is the best way to pray. However, then I think, oh, actually the best way to pray is the way Jesus taught us to pray in Matthew 6. And he gave us categories for how to pray. That's the Lord's Prayer, right? So it starts with this praise, our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. So it's like, oh, maybe that's the best way to pray if you're looking for what would I pray about? And then I'm like, but also on your knees and out loud is great, except the scriptures say to pray continually. And should you pray while you're driving to work? You should. So there's not a best way to pray. But all of us can keep getting better at praying because there's lots of good stuff there.
We did a series on prayer. It was called Grown-Up Prayers, right? That's a good place to start if you're looking.
That would be a fantastic place to start. Again, because most of us pray like we're kids, right? And you think the folding your hands and closing your eyes is critical to prayer. It's like, oh, actually, sometimes the best way to pray is to yell at God. And I say do that with reverence and respect. But you're being honest. And man, what better way is there to pray than to be honest with the one who already knows everything?
Yeah, you can find that in the Suncrest app. So if you have that on your phone, go ahead and type in grown-up prayers under the media section. What's your stance on church hopping?
I'm like, this is a total softball question to me.
It is softball.
I recently talked about I love church hopping. Oh my goodness. So here's why people even ask the question, right? Because we misperceive what church is supposed to be. Church is a family. It's relationships. So of course I'm not for church hopping. Not because I'm against you having different experiences. You can you can read lots of things. That's great. But we live in such a consumer culture where you just move to the next place if you're a little frustrated with something or you don't like something. I'm like, that is so opposite of what church is designed to be. By the way, obviously, Suncrest is on the receiving end of people who church hop and on the giving end of people who church hop. And because I hate it when people church hop away from Suncrest, every time I get the chance when someone comes, my first thing I say to them is, you should probably just go back to your previous church. And I mean it. At the level of my soul. I'm not saying there aren't any good reasons to potentially leave a church, but if you've been at 6 churches in the last, or you just hop around where you want to go, that's centering things in yourself rather than centering things in the body, and it's a mistake from a Christian perspective.
How do you answer a question that you have no idea how to answer? So I'm going to caveat this. I think
Okay.
The first way I want you to answer is how do you, Greg Lee, answer a question you have no idea how to answer? The second way would be, how would you recommend someone answer a question they have no idea how to answer?
Well,
it might be the same answer.
Yeah, I tell you, they are the same answer. So here's what you have to do. You have to be humble enough to let the words, I don't know, come out of your mouth. And I'm not always humble enough to do that. I have found myself halfway down an answer because I wanted to sound smart or I felt like I was obligated to take this opportunity. But the very best thing you can do when you don't have an answer is say, I don't know. And then there are places you can go, put a little effort into searching out that answer to help someone, but start. It's okay. It's healthy. It's humble to say, I don't know.
How do I learn to trust God so much that fear is defeated?
So one of the things I noticed in these questions is people live on the extremes or technicalities. So like what was interesting to me about this question is, how do I trust God so much that fear is defeated? And for me, it was a little bit of stepping back to say, I don't know. to go back to the previous point, I haven't defeated fear like in its entirety. There are times I've experienced overcoming it. Most of the time I didn't overcome it. I stepped through it. I was still afraid and moved on. And so, but it's interesting because I think the way the question gets asked tells me something about how we're thinking about it. And if someone assumes, if I just trusted God more, I would never be afraid, it's the wrong assumption, right? And I'm wanting to release people from those assumptions. So, and honestly, the only way to build your trust, which will help with your fear, is to trust, right? There were a lot of questions in here about how do I grow so I can trust more? And I'm like, I don't have that answer, right? The answer isn't grow somehow so you trust more. The answer is start trusting and you will grow. Genuinely, you will put yourself in a place where you're depending on God, and that will do something. And then when that works out, and maybe it doesn't even work out the exact way you want it to, but you see how God was trustworthy, the next time you won't be as afraid, but it's never going away until we're in heaven together.
Do you have a recommendation for anyone who's like, I want to figure out how to actually prioritize trust and put myself in situations where I do trust? Like, what is a good way to start if you're basically sitting here going, I don't know. Sure, I'll give an extra $5. It doesn't require a whole lot, but like, what's the first step that you would say someone should take?
I think you should pay attention to anything you think is uncomfortable but right. That's the category, uncomfortable but right. And like, it's right. And so, I mean, you think about this. Let me give you a few categories. Money, $5, whatever. Like, money's a great example of where a lot of people say, I want to do something and don't even give it to Suncrest, right? I'm just saying, like, you could make a difference in the world, but it's uncomfortable, but it's right. And if you don't do it, you will not grow in trust. And if you do trust, you'll grow in trust. You can do this with relationships, awkward conversations especially. You want to have a conversation with your son about something or your spouse about something, and you're like, oh, but I don't know what to say. I'm going to trip over my words. Like, it's uncomfortable, but you know it's right. And the only route is to step into it. You want to know the best way to really trust God?
Yes.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure you do.
Yes, that's literally the question.
You should, when you pray, you should begin your prayer by saying, God, I'm going to ask you to lead me. And whatever you lead me to do, I'm going to do it. Just so you know, I'm not holding back. If you're clear enough to give me a prompting to say where I should go, I will go there. And then pray about whatever decision that you have. And don't step back from that. You are saying to God first, if you lead me, I'm going there. And then go there.
That's really good. What scripture have you struggled with the most in your life?
This came up a couple times in the questions, and I thought there have been different things at different seasons. But let me give you one example. Jesus teaches that it's harder for a rich man to go to heaven than for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. And if you Google that, you'll come up with 15 different interpretations. Don't Google it. You can Google it if you want to. But the point is, wealth stands between me and God, right? Now, I sit in a very unique position, right? On one hand, it's my responsibility to teach a bunch of wealthy people every week. And you might think you're not wealthy. But when I say teach a bunch of wealthy people, let me include myself in that circle. I'm a wealthy person. We're wealthy. So what does that mean? What does it mean that it's tough for me? It's at least saying that. It's tough for me to get into the kingdom of heaven with this thing. Someone asked one of the questions during the week and said, is it a sin to be a billionaire? And I answered it no very quickly in the weekend service. And I've thought a lot about that since then. And I thought, it's not a sin to be a billionaire. But if you're a billionaire, you should really think about how you ended up there, because you definitely could have gotten there in sinful ways. And I don't mean you cheated to make money. I mean, you hoarded. I mean, you centered yourself rather than centering other people. I mean, you weren't generous, like all that. So I don't know. I just think, I said this in the spring. I have a few wrestling matches in my life right now. And I've been wrestling with God for 2 years about, hey, I don't worry about money. I have more than I need. But I just think money messes everything up. You've heard me say that in meetings before. Money messes everything up. The moment money's in the situation, it messes everything up. And I'm like, yeah. And money.
The moment you have a problem that money can solve, and you have money, you have a problem.
That's right.
Like it's two sides of the same coin, right?
Yeah. And we could definitely get too consumed with this and get too technical about it. I know that's true. I've seen people like that. But, what's your picture of a billionaire? I think for a lot of people, the picture is they have $20 billion of cash in the bank, right? But that's not true for most billionaires. The reason most people that are billionaires is they built an amazing business and it's worth that much. And in that sense, like, hey, if you build something and it's good for society and you're responsible with that, like, it's actually not liquid. And I know that might seem like a technical thing, but it's a different thing, right? Whereas if you're sitting on $20 billion of cash that you get to decide what to do with every day, and you're just sitting on it, I think that's a problem. That's a problem for a follower of Jesus, right? Because you're sitting on resources that could be deployed for the message of Christ to be shared around the world and for poverty to be alleviated, all the things that Jesus wants to do. So that's a little technical. I think another interesting thing is, why billionaire? Why not millionaire? And why millionaire, actually? Why not $100,000 in air or whatever that is? Like, what's the threshold? And then we get into a real conversation, right? Because
we're hitting with you and me.
Yes, because...
But I don't want to talk about me.
Right, I just want to talk about those people, the billionaires, right? And I think that comes out in our questions all the time. Is like, I'm asking about the problem people out there. Oh, you're asking me to grow? Not that interested in that. I want you to judge someone else. And I'm like, oh, we should pay attention to that in the spirit of the question, right?
It's almost like, there's a verse about logs and eyes and and
Yes.
other things like that, which if you Google that, I'm sure you'll
Uh-huh.
find some really interesting things about that too.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. I mean, this is a big category in my mind. I think Romans has helped us with it this year, but that we tend to center ourselves, right? And then everything else kind of has to adjust to how I see myself, right? So one of the things Jenny and I laugh about on our neighborhood Facebook page is how everyone complains about the coyotes that are outside our neighborhood. And I'm like, our neighborhood was built in the middle of a farm field, and you're going to blame the coyotes, right? We're the ones who moved here, right? We got in there. And then you get, can you believe how much traffic there is? Northwest Indiana is growing like crazy. I'm like, well, we're the ones who moved here, right? It was us. But it's almost like, but once I'm in, close it up, nobody else, right? And I'm like, what a weird way to live in the world that I don't see myself as part of the challenge that I'm facing. I always project it to the other. And I just think Christians are the worst of that, right? And so just kind of owning ourselves, like, I don't know, how about instead of talking about someone else's potential sinfulness or problem or lifestyle, how about I just look at my own, right? That's the take the log out of your own eye before you try to pull the speck of dust out of someone else's eye.
yeah.
So
Yeah, but it's the airplane thing, like, right? You got to
put your own mask on first, before you save somebody else. When I say I'm wealthy, what I mean is the moment Jenny and I had 2 incomes and we were making $50,000 a year, we were rich. And some of that I know because I've been around the world, right? And I know what the global perspective is, right? But some of it I know just because, like, oh my goodness. And then one of my big convictions, Mitch, Suncrest has probably never heard me say this, but I'm like, my goodness, to spread the gospel to the whole world, to start enough new churches, to do whatever it takes in the whole world, like, it takes resources to do that. And God's given Americans so many frickin' resources that I think potentially one of the judgments on America, if I could say it that way, from God is you had plenty of money.
Money wasn't the problem.
Money was not the problem, but it became the problem. This actually became the problem. This is why money messes everything up, right? It's in your pockets, right? The kingdom, people, they need, like, so what are we doing?
If I can't forgive myself for what I've done, how can God forgive me? Honestly, I could have texted this question because I wrestle with this one hard.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm a pastor.
Right.
Like, I can't imagine, like, I've got the degree that says, oh, I get what's happening here. And I walk people through this all the time. And I'm literally, even to this day, saying, I don't know, man.
Yeah. So this is a question, again, that I think these are the most common questions, the kind of things I get. And I think, if we build something on a little bit of a false understanding, we'll never get to an answer, right? So the way this question is written is, if I can't forgive myself for what I have done, how can God forgive me? And I'd just say, I want you to flip the 2 halves of that sentence. Because at least the way this is written, and I don't mean to be judgy about how a question was written, it is the assumption that I'll need to forgive myself first in order for God to forgive me. And I'd say, that's going to stand in your way. That's absolutely going to stand in your way. The right way to think about that is, how could God forgive me? Because if God could forgive me, then I could forgive myself. And there is an answer to the question of how could God forgive me. But if you think I have to forgive myself before God could, you'll never get there, because the forgiveness from God comes first, and it is available to every person at any moment. And these are big issues I know in people's lives, but you got to start with God's forgiveness. Let Him forgive you, and then you can forgive yourself.
Cool. I didn't know I needed to hear that today. Thanks, Greg. So there was lots of questions that were themed around this. So basically, if I'm a good enough person, why don't I get? If I don't believe in God, if I'm a good enough person, what does eternity look like? Or why don't I get the eternity of you fill in the blank?
Yes, there's a long list of questions in this realm. And I'm going to give you a short, straight, and maybe challenging answer for some of you. How many times have you heard me say it's not our good deeds that get us to heaven? Like that, I know that's an American misunderstanding. I have to keep repeating it, but it's so important. But the reason a good person who's an atheist doesn't go to heaven is because they rejected Jesus. That's the reason. The one who is God and is worthy of our worship, you decided isn't, and you're not going to worship him. And that's the core of this. Our whole salvation is built on the idea that Jesus is the one I can entrust my life to. He's the one that I worship. He went to the cross and he died for my sins. So it's not about being a nice person or a kind person or even a generous person or a compassionate person. It's about whether I honor the one who's the Son of God or whether I reject him. And then here's the thing. Then we start thinking about heaven and hell, right? And C.S. Lewis says this probably more clearly than anyone else. The idea is like, well, if you didn't want Jesus on earth, you won't have him in the afterlife. And those are just we're just living out we're living out what we lived on earth, we're living into eternity. And so if you rejected Jesus on earth, then reject him in the afterlife. And I understand that comes with big consequences, and obviously that plays into our minds. But this is really central on the fundamental piece is, do I trust Jesus? Do I accept him as God? And will I yield my life to him? Not about some list of behaviors that come out of that.
Yeah, I remember, gosh, this is, again, going back to that fancy degree, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the one preaching class I took that basically was like, yeah, someone can stand in a garage all day, but that doesn't make them a car. You can carry a motor around, some tires, and you're doing the thing cars do, but you are not any more than a car than you were not carrying tires and a motor and those things.
Right,
Like,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is the fundamental choice of life, of whether I entrust my life to Jesus or not.
Yeah.
So,
how can I be a long follower of Jesus but feel like I'm not worthy of being baptized?
Again, I'm going to answer this technically and say the only way that can happen is because you misunderstand baptism. It's the only way. I understand people misunderstand baptism. They followed Jesus, they've yielded their life to him, and somehow they picture baptism as a thing that comes at the end and not worthy, I think is the phrase here. But I think that's just not what baptism is. I mean, if you read the scriptures and study the scriptures, baptism is the initiation. It's not the graduation. And so the only way that someone can be a long follower of Jesus and feel like they're not worthy of being baptized is that they misunderstand what baptism is about.
Not to say you shouldn't get baptized, but like, is that person still a follower of Jesus?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I take them at face value. They say they're a long time follower of Jesus, right? That's why I say, well, the only answer to this is you misunderstand baptism, and that's okay to some degree. We all misunderstand certain things. I misunderstand certain things. I'm not trying to be judgy about it, but as a technical answer to the question, it's like, oh, if you properly understood baptism, it would have come at the initiation, or it would come tomorrow, right? Now that you do understand. Like there's not some extra threshold of worthiness for baptism. It's just a misunderstanding of, and maybe you were taught that misunderstanding. There's 100 good reasons why someone might have that misunderstanding, but it's just a misunderstanding.
And if you're watching this right now and you're sitting on the fence going, maybe I have had a misunderstanding and I would like to talk a little bit about that. Mm-hmm. Text going under to 94,000.
Yeah.
Someone from our team would love to have a
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. I mean, you've probably sat in our services and seen the celebrations that take place when someone's baptized. It's the most beautiful thing to me. And it's not about cleaning your life up, getting worthy. It's not. It's like, I yield my life to Christ. Let's go under.
Yeah. So this is a long one, so bear with me. Will people go to heaven if they die while living in a life of active sin and have not asked for forgiveness? As long as we believe in the resurrection, are we automatically into heaven?
So if you think believing in the resurrection gets you automatically into heaven, you are in error. Why do I say that? Because actually the scriptures say that even the demons believed in who Jesus was. They understood that he had risen from the dead.
So you're saying those people are demons?
I am not calling anyone a demon.
We'll cut that.
I think this is a really, really important piece, because then you get to the first half of the question, right? If the assumption is, I just believe in the resurrection and I'm automatically in, it's almost like a gotcha to God, right? I followed your rules. I did what you said I had to do. And then over here, I'm just going to live a life of sin. I'm going to do whatever I want. I'm going to, not ask for forgiveness. And I mean, some of you have heard me say this. I'm like, don't play games with God, right? The scriptures say God cannot be mocked, and he is fully compassionate. He is fully patient. Like, I hope you experience that at Suncrest all the time. But the moment you think you got the loophole, since I said the magic words, I'm in, and then I can go live whatever life I want, that's mocking God, and no, he doesn't play games, right? So then there is this question of, I'm going to read the question right above that one, right? Because it's similar, right? Can someone be saved if they intentionally sin and don't plan on stopping?
Oh, I didn't realize I skipped that.
Yeah, it's okay.
So sorry.
It's okay. But I think that's a great question, because there's lots of people who wrestle with sinfulness in their lives, right? And I respect that. I wrestle with sinfulness in parts of my life, right? So it can't be that committing sins, keeps me, makes my relationship with God inauthentic. But if I'm doing something that I know is rebellious against God, and then I just kind of decide, I'm not going to change it. I'm going to do it. I don't care what God says about it. And then especially if you think, but since I was baptized, since I believe in the resurrection, since I whatever, he can't do anything to me about it. I'd be like, don't treat God like that. That is mocking God. And so if anyone who's listening to this has gotten to that place where you're like, I know some things I'm doing that are wrong, and actually I just decided I'm going to keep doing them. I want the Holy Spirit to convict your soul right now and say, you need to rethink that, because that's not what followers of Jesus do.
So God doesn't like people who are technically correct?
God doesn't like them. The scriptural phrase, God cannot be mocked, it is, I think, the right application of this. Like, if you think you got the loophole, you're technically correct, so God has to, you've missed the whole point. So
I don't know if you feel this, but like, it's the, we've got a 3-year-old, so teaching a 3-year-old how to do things that are like, the being a functional human things.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the, hey, can you go get this? And then 5 minutes go by, and I'm like, hey, did you go get that? And then she and all of her 3-year-old independence is like, I will. And then finally, after 20 minutes, I'm like, hey, I needed that a while ago. Where are you at? Getting to the place where she's like, I mean, I got it eventually. Which I'm like, one, we've got a smart 3-year-old, but two, also, I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated that you chose to be technically right. You got it. You're right. Like, come on.
So, I mean, father to 3-year-old is almost always the right metaphor for God to us. Almost always, right? And so I think it's a great example.